They say hospitals are places of healing, but every nurse knows they are also places where strange things linger. I remember my mentor once told me during my first month on the night shift that the quietest rooms can scream the loudest if you listen long enough. Back then, I thought she was just trying to scare me. I laughed it off and moved on with my rounds. But over the years, I began to understand what she meant. It was not just the lights flickering or the cold spots in certain hallways. It was not just the way call buttons would light up in empty rooms. It was the feeling, a certain weight in the air, like the walls remembered every death and held on to the last breath of every patient who never left. I worked the night shift on the 3rd floor of St. Margaret's Hospital. It is the quietest wing in the building. That is because half of it was shut down after a fire in room 304 15 years ago. They walled it up and left it untouched. No repairs, no renovations, just sealed it like a tomb. The patient inside had doused himself in cleaning alcohol and struck a match. His name was Mark Dalton. He was a schizophrenic brought in after a failed suicide attempt at home. Nobody knew how he got his hands on the alcohol. After the fire, they never moved another patient into that room. Maintenance tried to restore the hallway once, but the workers refused to go back in, said they heard scratching from inside the walls. After that, the hospital gave up. We called it the Dead Hall. Last October, I started getting calls from room 304. The call board would light up red around 3:13 every morning. Always the same time. Always room 304. The first night I thought it was a glitch. Old wiring, maybe, but I still went to check. Of course, the hallway was sealed just like always. The heavy plastic sheet covering the door was intact. No signs of tampering. I called maintenance and they confirmed no one had been in or near that wing for years. They even pulled the power from that section. No electricity. No way the call light could even work. I reported it to my supervisor and they dismissed it as a faulty panel, said it happened sometimes. But the calls kept coming. Every single night. Same time. Room 304. I started asking around, older nurses, janitors, even the cafeteria staff. Most of them pretended not to hear me. Some changed the subject. But one night I found a nurse named Clara sitting alone in the break room. She had been here long enough to remember the fire. She told me they never recovered Mark's body. Said the flames were too intense. Said all they found was the metal frame of the bed, and a scorched ID bracelet melted into the floor. She said the night before the fire he told her something strange, that he had been discharged already, that the hospital was keeping him against his will, that someone needed to let him go. She thought it was just part of his illness, but now she was not so sure. I started dreaming about him, a man sitting at the edge of a burned bed, his skin blistered and blackened, but his eyes calm. He never spoke in the dream, just stared at me and pointed toward the hallway. I would wake up drenched in sweat and still hear the beep of the call button in my head. One night I finally decided to answer the call, really answer it. I waited until 3:10 and made my way to the dead hall. The plastic was still up, but the call light above the sealed door was glowing red. My hands were shaking as I peeled the plastic back. The smell hit me first, burnt flesh mixed with antiseptic. The air was thick like it had not moved in years. The door opened on the first try. No resistance. Inside the room was exactly as it had been in the photos. Charred walls, melted tiles, the bed frame still bolted to the floor, but someone was sitting on it. He was wearing a hospital gown, blackened at the edges. His hands were folded neatly in his lap. His skin was cracked and black, like tree bark after a fire, but his eyes were the same as in my dream. Clear, calm. He looked up at me and said quietly, "I think I am ready to go home now." I could not move. I just stood there frozen. He reached behind him and held up a clipboard. It was my discharge sheet, signed by me, dated for that exact day. I never signed anything. I never filled anything out, but there it was. My name, my signature. I reached out slowly and took the paper. The second my fingers touched it, the lights above flickered and the room grew ice cold. The figure on the bed started to fade. Not burn away or vanish, just slowly became less solid, until there was nothing left but the gown and the clipboard in my hand. I turned and left the room, without looking back. When I returned to the nurse's station, the call board was dark. No more red light. No more room 304. The hallway was sealed again the next morning. They said I must have imagined it. That no call ever came in. That no log showed any activity. But I still have the clipboard. I keep it in my locker. And every night at 3:13, I feel a strange warmth in the air, like someone just left the room. Since that night, I have not received another call. The dreams have stopped. But I still walk by the dead hall sometimes. And I still feel him there, watching, waiting, not angry, just patient. Because I think he was never really asking for help. I think he just needed someone to believe he was real. And once I did, he could finally leave. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had refused to take the clipboard, if I had turned and walked away. Because lately another room on the board has started to light up at night. Room 3312, the one directly across the hall, and I am the only one who ever sees it. The scariest part of working nights is not the darkness outside, it is the silence inside. That was something my nursing professor used to say back when I was still in school. At the time, I thought it was just a poetic way to talk about boredom during slow shifts. But now, I am not so sure. Last fall, I picked up an overnight shift at St. Alora's Hospital to help out a co-worker named Jen. She had called in sick with the flu, and I owed her a favor from a few weeks earlier when she covered for me during a family emergency. The moment I walked onto the floor, everything felt a little strange. The hall lights flickered more than usual, and the nurse's station was quieter than it should have been. I brushed it off as just the usual weirdness that comes with night shifts, especially in the older wings of the hospital. I said hello to the other nurses, grabbed my clipboard, and started rounds like normal. The first thing that struck me was the way patients kept calling me Jen, not just one or two, but nearly all of them. At first, I thought maybe word had not gotten around that I was covering her shift. I gently corrected them, telling each one my real name. But they always nodded slowly and gave me this look like they knew something I did not. One older woman in 2013B even laughed quietly and said, "You always were a joker, Jen." I let it slide and continued on. Around 2 in the morning, I stopped by the staff break room to grab a coffee, and when I opened the microwave door, I saw something that made my stomach twist. In the reflection of the small glass window, just for a second, I saw someone standing behind me. Blood soaked her scrubs, and her face was swollen and bruised. I spun around, heart racing. But there was no one there. The room was empty. I stared at the microwave for a full minute before I could make myself close the door and walk out. I tried to stay calm and kept telling myself I was just tired. Night shifts mess with your head. Everyone knows that. But the longer the night went on, the more things felt wrong. I passed by room 219, which was supposed to be closed off for renovations, and the door creaked open slightly as I walked by. From inside, I thought I heard someone whispering. I froze in place and waited, listening closely. The whispering stopped the moment I leaned closer to the door. When I peeked in, the room was empty and dark. I closed it and walked away quickly, pretending I had not heard anything. Then came the worst part. I went to check on Mr. Lawrence in room 210. A quiet man recovering from surgery, and he looked at me with wide eyes and said, "You are bleeding again, Jen." I touched my face instinctively, but there was nothing there. He pointed toward the window, and when I turned to look, I saw the reflection again. Jen, blood pouring from a gash in her forehead. One arm bent at an unnatural angle. She was looking right at me, eyes filled with something like sadness, or maybe anger. I stumbled back and left the room, my breathing shallow and fast. I ran to the nurse's station and tried to call down to security, but the line was dead. I picked up my phone, but there was no signal. It was like the hospital was cut off from the world. I sat there shaking, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That was when another nurse, Sheila, walked by and paused when she saw me. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said with a small laugh. I tried to explain what was going on, but she just gave me this strange look and said, "You really do not remember, do you? Jen was your friend. You were the one who found her body after the crash. You even went to the funeral." My legs went cold, and my hands began to tremble. I had gone to the funeral. I had cried, but I had buried those memories so deep I almost believed they were not real. I told Sheila that I needed air and rushed to the stairwell. As I descended, I felt the temperature drop. Each step creaked louder than the last. At the bottom, I saw the door to the basement cracked open. Something compelled me to push it fully open. Inside, the lights buzzed dimly overhead. It smelled like rust and old bleach, and there, standing in the middle of the hallway, was Jen. Not a reflection this time. Her body was as broken and bloodied as I remembered from the accident photos. But her eyes were clear. She looked at me with pain etched into her face, and spoke one word: "Why?" I backed up, whispering apologies. I did not understand. She took a step forward, and suddenly I remembered. Jen had not called in sick that night. She had never asked me to cover her shift. I had switched with her because I wanted the weekend off for a day. She had taken my place and died on her way in. The guilt I buried had twisted into something real, something alive. I screamed, ran out of the basement, and did not stop until I reached the ER lobby. The automatic doors opened, and I collapsed onto the cold floor, crying and shaking. The next morning, they found me outside, still curled up. I tried to explain what happened, but no one believed me. They said there was no call from Jen, no record of her ever working that shift. Her name was not on the board. Her locker had been cleared out months ago, but every night since then, I still see her in mirrors, in windows, in the gleam of medical equipment, and sometimes, when I walk past room 219, I still hear her whispering. Her voice is quiet, almost gentle. She keeps asking me the same thing: "Why did you let me die for you?" And I never have an answer.
Sometimes, I think the hospital remembers more than it lets on, the nurse said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the walls were listening. I had just started my second year on night shift rotations, and stories like these were passed around like old legends, mostly brushed off with laughter or rolled eyes. But some, like the one I am about to tell, clung to you long after the shift ended. I was assigned to the pediatric wing of the hospital, which was odd in itself because there were no children admitted that week. The floor was cold and dimly lit, the kind of silence that made you hear your own heartbeat. It was supposed to be routine, just checking on empty rooms and maintaining reports. Around 2 a.m., I heard it for the first time, a soft cry. Not loud, not urgent, just quiet sobbing, like a baby who had been crying for hours and finally accepted no one was coming. At first, I thought it was the wind through the old windows or maybe even the plumbing. Hospitals are old buildings with a million ways to scare yourself. But the next night, it happened again. This time the sound was clearer, a wet, sad whimper that seemed to seep out of the walls. I followed it down the hallway and noticed that it was loudest outside room 9B. That room had been sealed off for years after a ceiling collapse had made it unsafe. But I swore I could hear the crying coming from inside. I leaned in close and placed my ear against the door. The sobs were unmistakable now, mixed with a soft crackling static, like an old radio stuck between channels. The hair on my arm stood up. I reported it to the supervising nurse, but she just stared at me for a long moment before saying that there was nothing in room 9B, and that I should probably try to get more rest between shifts. I tried to ignore it for a few nights. I kept to my rounds, avoided that hallway and kept my headphones in, but the crying got louder. It started happening earlier in the night, sometimes right after shift began. One night, I found myself drawn back to the door of 9B, almost without realizing it. This time, I noticed something I had not before, a soft red glow leaking from beneath the door, pulsing like a heartbeat. I knew what it was. I had seen it 1,000 times in other rooms. A baby monitor, one of the older models with that signature red light that blinked when it detected sound, but there were no children in the ward. None. I hesitated, then left quickly, pretending I had never gone near it. The next day I checked the patient records and floor plans. Room 9B had not been used in over 15 years. No explanation why, no maintenance reports, just silent. It began affecting my sleep. I started dreaming of empty cribs and lullabies that played backwards. One night, I woke up gasping because I had heard the same cry in my dream that echoed in the hallways. I needed answers. On my next shift, I took a flashlight and waited until the floor was quiet. I walked to room 9B and noticed the wall beside it looked different from the others. The tiles were newer, as if they had been replaced or repaired. I tapped it. Hollow. It was not a room anymore. It was a sealed space, bricked up and hidden behind what looked like a regular hospital wall. That was when I knew I had to see what was inside. I called my uncle, a retired maintenance worker who had once worked on the hospital renovations. When I asked about room 9B, he went completely silent. Then he said very quietly that 9B used to be a nursery, a long time ago, before a fire took the lives of 3 infants and a nurse who had locked herself inside with them. The hospital had covered it up to avoid lawsuits. They sealed it off and told everyone it was a structural issue. No one was ever supposed to go in again. I could not let it go. That night, I brought a crowbar from my car and waited until the cameras were in their reset cycle. I pried open the false wall. Behind it was darkness and dust, the smell of rot and old fire damage creeping out like a living thing. I stepped inside. The nursery was still there. Half-burnt cribs, melted toys, charred wallpaper with little cartoon bears faded into ash. In the center was a baby monitor, sitting on the floor, the red light still blinking, still alive. And through the monitor came that cry, louder now, agonizing. But it was not just one baby anymore. It was 3, wailing in sync. And beneath their cries was something else. A woman's voice, humming, soft and broken, singing a lullaby I did not recognize. I turned to leave and found the exit sealed. The wall had closed itself. My flashlight flickered and died. I could not breathe. I could not scream. Then the monitor's static rose in pitch, distorting into a shriek that cut into my skull. The air grew thick and freezing. Shadows formed in the corners, writhing. I felt hands grab my arms, tiny and cold, dozens of them, clawing, desperate. The woman's voice turned into a scream, not of pain, of rage. I blacked out. When I woke up, I was lying outside the wall. The opening was gone, sealed again like it had never been touched. My supervisor found me and accused me of sleeping on the job. I told her everything. She stared, just like before. Then she said something I will never forget, that the last nurse who worked this shift in the pediatric wing started hearing the same cries. She disappeared 3 weeks later. They found her ID badge in the walls during an unrelated repair job. Nothing else. I quit 2 days later. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear it. The static, the crying, the humming lullaby that I never learned but now know by heart. People say, hospitals save lives, but some lives never leave. Some cries are never answered. And some nurses, like me, will always wonder if we were supposed to find that room, or if it found us.
There are some things we hear once and never forget. I still remember what he said that night. He whispered my name and told me how I would die. I laughed back then, but no one is laughing now. It was my 3rd year working the night shift at St. Augustine Hospital, a place that felt more like a mausoleum than a medical center. You got used to strange things, hallway lights that flickered for no reason, ants talking to people who were not there, cold spots that came and went with no explanation. Most of us brushed it off: sleep deprivation, overwork, imagination. But everything changed the night they wheeled him in. No ID, no family, no history. He had been found unconscious near the river. The paramedics said his pulse was weak and he was cold as ice, but alive, barely. He was brought in just before midnight, room 405. I was the charge nurse that night, and when I looked at him, something about his face made my stomach turn, pale and sunken, like he had been lost for years. I wrote it off as a typical John Doe case and moved on. We had other patients, other duties. About an hour after he arrived, one of the newer nurses, Erica, came to the desk pale as a ghost. She said the man had whispered something to her. She swore he was unconscious, but she leaned in to adjust his IV, and he spoke her name. He called her Erica Lynn Hampton, and said she had stolen something that did not belong to her. We all laughed it off, until the next night when Erica did not show up for work. We thought maybe she was just sick. Then we got the call from her roommate. Erica had been found in her bathtub, her wrists slit open. No note, no sign of struggle. But here is the thing. A week before, she had told me a secret. When she was a teenager, she had taken some pills from her grandmother's medicine cabinet. The old woman had died that week. Erica always believed it was her fault. No one else knew that. No one after her death. The air in room 405 got colder. We stopped talking about it, but we all felt it. The man never woke up. His eyes stayed closed, his body limp, but he started speaking. Just whispers, faint, like he was talking in a dream. And what he said was always the same. A name, a secret, a warning, and then silence. I tried to stay away from that room, but it became a pattern. A nurse would check on him. A nurse would hear something. A nurse would die. Always within 24 hours. Jared, our night porter, laughed about it, said we were scaring ourselves. That was the last thing he ever said. They found him the next morning in the basement boiler room. No wounds, no marks, just dead. The autopsy said his heart had stopped, but his face was frozen in terror, like he had seen something right before it happened. I tried to make sense of it. I pulled his file. Nothing. No medical records. No police reports. No DNA match. It was like he had never existed. But the whispering got worse, more frequent. And then it happened to me. I was checking vitals one night when I leaned over him. I should not have done it. I was tired, distracted. My hair brushed against his cheek. That was all it took. His lips moved, barely, and he said my full name. First, middle, last, and then he whispered something else. Something only I knew. When I was 15, I had left my little brother home alone. I told my parents he was with me. That night, the house caught fire. He died before anyone got back. I had never told a soul. My knees buckled. I almost fell. I begged my supervisor to transfer me. I offered to work in pediatrics, maternity, anything. But it was too late. I knew what came next. I could not sleep that night. I kept checking the locks. Every creak made me jump. Around 3 a.m. I started coughing. Hard. I thought it was just nerves. But then the blood came. Bright red on my hands. I panicked. Dialed. When they brought me back in, they said it was a ruptured vessel in my throat. A rare one. Almost unheard of in someone my age. They stabilized me. But I knew it had begun. That morning, I went back to room 405. I had to see him. To understand. He was still lying there. Still silent, but this time, I looked closer. His skin looked different.
Not just pale, stretched, thin, like it was barely clinging to the bone underneath. And then I saw it. A tag, almost invisible, hidden under his collarbone, burned into his skin. Letters I did not recognize. I took a picture and sent it to a friend who studied ancient languages. She replied 1 hour later. It was an old Aramaic phrase. It translated to, "He who remembers the debt." That was when it all made sense. He was not a man. He was something older, something forgotten, something that had watched us all, seen our guilt, our sins, our lies. He did not need to wake up. He already knew us. Every nurse who died had something they had buried, some shame, some darkness. He was not punishing us. He was just reminding us what we were. I left the hospital the next day, quit nursing altogether, but he is still there. They moved him to a long-term care wing now. Room 405 is sealed off. No one goes in. But I heard a rumor. Last week a new nurse transferred in. She thought the stories were all in our heads. They say she went in to check vitals. They say she came out crying. No one has seen her since. So if you ever end up at St. Augustine Hospital, and they tell you to avoid the West Wing, listen to them. If you hear a whisper that knows your name, run. Do not look back, because he never forgets, and he never lets go.
Some patients never leave, not because they cannot, but because they will not. When the transplant wing opened at St. Ives Memorial Hospital, it felt like a miracle. Nurses clapped, doctors smiled, and the media praised the facility as a breakthrough in modern medicine. I was just a nurse back then, new to the floor, full of hope, and maybe a little too naive. They called it the Donor Integration Project, or DIP for short, and the results were remarkable. The first few patients who received organs from the same donor healed faster than expected. Their bodies accepted the transplants like they had been waiting for them all along. No signs of rejection, no complications. At first, the medical staff celebrated it like a lucky coincidence, but by the fifth successful transplant, it felt like something greater, almost supernatural. Everyone kept talking about the donor like he had been some kind of hero, even though none of us knew who he really was. His identity was sealed. All we knew was that 5 patients had received his heart, liver, kidneys, and corneas, and they were all doing extremely well, too well. It started with little things, harmless things. One of the recipients, Mr. Dalka, began humming a strange melody every time we walked into his room. None of us recognized the tune. It had no words, just a low, throaty hum that stuck with you long after leaving. Another patient, Maria Fern, a sweet older woman who had received a kidney, became obsessed with the number 13. She asked for 13 ice cubes in her water. She folded her hospital gown 13 times before wearing it. She would cry if someone gave her a meal with more or less than 13 peas or potato chunks. We thought it was just stress, or maybe a side effect from her medications. But one night, I caught her staring at her reflection in the window, whispering over and over again, "Donor room 13. That room did not exist, at least not on any of our maps. I tried to tell myself they were just coincidences. After all, hospitals are full of odd behaviors. Trauma does that to people. But then the carving started. The first was Brian Neely. He had received the donor's heart. One morning during rounds, we found him sitting up in bed, smiling like nothing was wrong. But when we pulled back the blankets, we saw the letters JASPER carved across his chest in crooked, jagged lines. He had done it with the metal hook of his IV pole. The name meant nothing to any of us. We assumed it was someone he loved, or maybe a memory triggered by his near-death experience. But he would not stop. Every day, new letters, Jasper written again and again down his arms, across his thighs.
even inside his mouth where he had chewed the name into the walls of his cheeks, until he bled. The others followed, each in their own way. Maria began scratching the name into the walls with her fingernails, until her fingers bled raw. One night she even used a plastic knife from her dinner tray to carve it into her stomach. The cornea recipient, Laura Chen, refused to sleep. She said every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, Jasper, standing in the corner of her vision watching. He never moved, he never spoke, he just stared. Laura clawed at her eyes until we had to strap her down, but even then she kept screaming about donor room 13. When we checked our records, we found something strange. The original donor had not come through the ER. He had been transferred from a closed psychiatric facility that had been torn down a few months earlier. The facility's name, St. Ive Asylum, the same grounds our hospital had been built on. Out of curiosity, I began digging deeper into the donor's history. The file had been locked, but I managed to get a glimpse. His name was Jasper Hale, age 29, diagnosed with persistent violent delusions and sociopathic tendencies. He had spent most of his life institutionalized after attacking his parents with a carving knife when he was only 12. The file also mentioned room 13, not part of the main building, but a hidden room used for severe cases. Patients held there were isolated completely, no contact, no light, no voices. Jasper had been the last occupant. He died during a fire that broke out just weeks before the transplant wing opened. No one claimed the body, no autopsy was performed, just a rushed transfer and a list of perfectly preserved organs that should have been destroyed. I remember the night the last patient died, Laura, the one with the corneas. I had come in early for my shift when I saw her room door open. Inside, the bed was empty. Blood coated the floor in thick, wet strokes. Jasper's name was painted across the walls and ceiling, but the most horrifying part was the mirror. Laura had used her own blood to draw a map, not of the hospital as it was now, but as it had once been. The outline matched the old asylum blueprints I had seen in the file. In the center of the map was a small square marked Room 13. I followed it. I should not have. Down beneath the west wing, past sealed stairwells and locked doors, I found it. The door was heavy and rusted. No number, no label, but I knew. Inside, the air was thick and rotting. The walls were covered in carvings, names, dates, screams etched in silence, and there on the floor was Jasper's name written hundreds of times over each other, like he had spent every hour of every day carving his identity into the world that had erased him. And then I heard it. That humming, that same sick melody Mr. Dalka used to hum. It filled the room though no one was there. I ran. I should have told someone, but I never did. The transplant wing was shut down soon after. Officially, they blamed a lack of funding, but I know the truth. Jasper is still here, pieces of him scattered inside the people who were meant to heal. The body may die, but something deeper remains, something that cannot be discharged. And sometimes, when I walk past the sealed wing, I hear it again, the humming, the scratching, the name, Jasper. If you ever find yourself in a hospital room and wake up with a strange name carved into your skin, leave. Leave before he remembers how to become whole again.